Hi, everyone, and I want to introduce today's speaker. I know this is the third of 4 webinars in Mary Kay's series for the leadership learning community. So I will just do a brief introduction. Mary Kay Chess is the Director of Educational Programs for NCHN, or the National Cooperative of Health Networks. She is also Dean of Academic Affairs at Pinchot University in Seattle, Washington, as well as a consultant. She works with foundations, organizations, and their boards on building leadership capacity. So I will turn it over to Mary Kay to share today's presentation on network board development.
Leslie, thank you. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yep.
Oh, wonderful. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for spending part of the day with us. We think that this particular focus today on network boards and the development of network boards in alignment with executive directors is just a very key structure for driving the behavior and the outcome of your network. So we're just delighted that you're with us today. Thank you for filling out this survey. You can see just from the survey results here that we have a real mix of some job descriptions in place for boards, more not than in place. We have some approved bylaws in place, and 2 of you are considering not creating bylaws, and there are other alternatives for that, and then about half and half on the actual job description. So much of what we'll talk about today is alignment of the network leaders' job description with the board or steering committee. So when you're ready, Leslie, if you'll pull up the slides, we'll begin to start. And while she's doing that, please pull up your self-assessment tool. As Leslie said, this will be a chance to complete this while we're talking through approaches and opportunities for working with your board. We're going to be looking specifically at section 9, starting with question 9 on section D. And before we jump in, we had a really great participation in the chat box the last time. And as I recall, there's also this group is willing to hit star 2 and actually put questions in verbally. So either way, please feel free to do that during our engagement for the next 40-some minutes. So let's start out with just a description of boards. This is an important container for describing why the development of your board or frankly your steering committee is essential. Boards serve the role of fiduciaries, and they steer your network or your organization toward a sustainable future by adopting very sound governance and financial management policies which ensure adequate reserves and traction for your network. So kind of lots of legalese in that, but please keep in mind some key components of the importance and the responsibility of boards as separate and distinct from network leaders. Your board and your board members serve, again, as the fiduciaries. They really are responsible for steering you into the sustainable future, something that HRSA's really ask you each to look at. And they're responsible for adapting really sound governance policies that allow a network to attain traction. So as we move forward, please keep that in mind. We're going to be talking about who are your key stakeholders, who's on your board, and perhaps who should be on your board and not present. So we'll examine that in section D9. As we talked, if you recall, as we talked about in change, our session on change, innovation, and creativity, structure drives behavior and allows for conversations to take place among competitors, and this allows creativity to emerge. We're really going to talk about 6 tools that drive the behavior of boards and allow you as a network leader to really move fully into the facilitation role that you're best able to provide. And the last thing we're going to do is really talk about board value, the value proposition that the board receives from serving as the network board, and also what benefits the board members individually receive, because there's a give and a take in serving as a board member. So those are the three areas we're going to look at today. One last kind of framing for you: in addition to your board being a fiduciary, whether or not you're going to create bylaws or not, or whether you have a steering committee, they're serving as fiduciaries for you, and they have really three main areas of duty. And actually it's the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience. And those sound a little vague, but the duty of care is really alignment with the vision, mission, and values of your network. They are contributing time, effort, and creative thought because of that duty of care. There's an alignment with your mission and vision. The duty of loyalty really comes with what your board really stipulates in the bylaws and the job descriptions. So in a few minutes we'll talk about qualities, but for example, is your board looking at the quality of full participation, meaning that everyone should come to every meeting unless there's some sort of emergency, or 95% of the meetings? So you set out expectations for duty of loyalty. You set out those expectations in your bylaws, and then you actually track them on the regular board meetings. And then the duty of obedience is probably the most straightforward. There's some laws and regulations for steering committee, networks, and boards, and often those fall into fiscal accountability and responsibility, although that's certainly not the only obedience that we have as board members. But there's a need to be fiscally accountable and responsible. Yearly audits, most likely. Monthly financial reports that the board is responsible for reviewing and approving. So again, the duty of care, attention and enhancement of the purpose and value of the network, duty of loyalty, again, living into both the board job description and the bylaws, and the duty of obedience, that's adhering to any applicable state or federal laws and regulations. So that's what we're going to be focused on, and we're actually going to talk about 6 very tangible tools as we go through this process. So hang on, here we go. For those of you, I just wanted to put this up because it's not unusual to find some members who will not be developing bylaws. What is important to consider is some sort of agreement. This happens to be the agreement that we've talked about generally, that kind of holds our learning community. These 4 sessions that, 2 we've had, 1 we're having now, and the 4th one, these kind of guide our conversations. Today I'd encourage you to pose questions, because someone probably has the same question, or pose promising practices. Each network is so very different and unique that this will inform us all. But if you're not going to create bylaws, or if you're just creating them, here is an agreement that's really important to say, here's how we'll behave to one another, here's how we'll ensure that there's traction. So think about this as a tool if you're not going to develop bylaws, and it's also a tool even if you have bylaws. Having something like this in the front of the room, attached to all the minutes, attached to the agenda, just reminds everyone that when they enter the network space, as opposed to their home space, whether they're the CIO, CEO, whatever their role is back home, when they enter your space in the network, here are kind of the rules of engagement that you all have created. So again, today, please use the chat box for questions and practices. Grab your self-assessment, as Leslie said, section D, and we're going to really focus on that. You've seen this slide before, and it has a slightly different impact today. I'd like you to really focus on, most of the time for successful networks, there are 5 to 7 board members or steering committee members. Some of you will have more than that, as we've been in conversation for the last several times together, but usually 5 to 7 is a very manageable number for a board. Again, a reminder that you've got a very unique business model going. And at the end, we'll talk about trends, and I'll pull one forward right now. One trend that's being looked at is called the sharing economy, and that means that you're convening often in your networks competitors who are willing to share both information and resources in order to leverage available dollars, available people. Sometimes it's very hard in certain areas to recruit specialties, both in the medical profession, the nursing profession, and also in areas like IT and finance. And so you're really leveraging competitors to collaborate, and that's something very unique about your business model. So structures like job descriptions for the board members and the bylaws are very essential kind of signposts that you need to create structure and movement and traction in your network. So pull section D, and here we go. I want to have you look first of all at number 9, and on this, if you'll just identify who is in your network and just quickly check those off. When you get to other, if we have failed to mention some, please put them on your own assessment, but then if you would just put them in the chat box, that would be great. Who have we missed? Thank you, Trish. Everyone have that done? And under other, what have we missed here? Great. Human services at the county level, perfect. Again, I can't stress enough that we totally realize that your network is unique just because of the people around the table and the services that your unique community or communities need. Community access hospitals, perfect. Treatment providers, great. You can begin to see then, thank you all for jumping in. This really starts to bring the diversity of the different communities to the table. And more importantly, the next question that you're going to be asked is, does this structure make sense for your network? And we're going to talk about qualities here in a moment. So keep these additional ones in mind. Deborah, you've really highlighted one of the areas I'm seeing emerging in several networks around the country, and that is leveraging universities, community colleges. Mark, as you've tucked in here, the hospital-owned clinics, they're often pivotal resources in communities. Perfect. So keep this list and make note of these, because as we move on, a question you're going to be asked is, where's the gap in your own board? Where's the potential gap so you can take this information back to them? Thank you. This is probably I was trying to figure out how can we begin to represent the diversity that you both need on your network board and that you currently have on your network board. And the way I'd like to pose the question for this particular beginning to develop job descriptions and bylaws is, as you think about those members that you just checked off, whether an FQHC, whether they're a university, whether they're a hospital clinic, as you think about these board members and these chairs, in the chat box, if you'll put the qualities that you're looking for network board members. What qualities are important? You've been in this work for some of you almost a year, for others just months. So you've got a good sense of what qualities that you're looking for. And I'll just start us off here. The first quality in a board member, and we all define these differently, but one of the first responsibilities and accountabilities in good governance is a board member who's responsible. And each of us will probably define that a little differently. But good governance requires board members who are responsible. So again, take a look at these wild seats, kind of in your mind visually imprint a member at each one of these seats, and what qualities are you looking for? Great. Responsible, ability to see the big picture beyond their organization. That's perfect. That ties to why you've put this network in place, Beth. That's terrific. Commitment and accountability. Great. Taking ownership. Wonderful. Please take note of these qualities. and they begin to inform the actual job description that you're creating. Understanding barriers. Jennifer, often we really don't tee up this core competency. And when we get to the section on your assessment about what value does a specific board member bring, sometimes this ability to understand barriers and, as Geraldine is putting out here, the ambassador, those two roles are often undervalued. And they'll play on words, but those are very key values. Good. Influence in their own organization. Robert, sometimes that is so key. So good governance requires the responsiveness. Think about how decisions are made. Taking ownership, as Sherry has up here, really might also tie nicely to consensus. How will they make decisions? How will they land on a yes or a no? Participatory, will they include others? So that participatory inclusiveness. Following, of course, and adhering to any laws that govern them. Efficient, accountable, transparent. All of these are qualities, and let's just take a moment to kind of think of these, make note of them, and think about your board members and where they might represent these qualities and that bring the value to your organization. Tim, thank you. That positive reputation, you're building brand, so to speak. You're building momentum, and you're doing that through, this is one of the values actually that these members contribute. You're doing that through who exactly is sitting around your table and what is the value and the esteem by which they're held in your unique communities. So that's almost an intangible, but like being an ambassador, like being fully engaged, those are critical attributes of good governance and really effective boards. Well, we'll move from these crazy chairs, but they signify the diversity and value around your table. Let's move into this. Why does this structure make sense for your network? Let's take a look at 9A. So you've identified who's on your board. The question here is really around why have you left anyone out? Let me just cut to the chase here. And on 9A and B, the real question is, based on all of the comments you've seen from your colleagues, the qualities that you need for a successful board, why does this structure make sense? And equally important to consider 9B, who have you left out, or who should you add? And when I say you, it's your, who should your board consider that should be around the table? Who do you want to recommend that might be missing? This becomes a key question in 9A and 9B. And again, making sure that you're very clear on your mission and your vision allows you then to consider who is around that table and why. Let's go ahead then and look at, I don't want to go too quickly because I want you to have a chance to fill out your assessment. When you're ready, let me just give you another minute here to say anyone else that you should think about. We've heard a broad range of state entities, local entities, both providers. One of the ones that didn't pop up on your particular conversation that you might want to consider is, should you have actual clients or recipients of your service at the board table? Just a question, no right or wrong there. It's interesting as you continue to look at these great comments and best practices that are coming out of some of the Geraldine, you read my mind, or I was reading yours, one of that, the constituent. Should they be at the table? That's a really key pivotal question for your board to be engaged in considering. It's part of it's a wonderful question to tee up for strategic planning. And strategic planning, whether it's full-blown strategic planning or an update of your strategic plan, is a yearly activity, as is a review of, you're going to be encouraged today, you're going to be encouraged to create job descriptions for you as the network leader and have the board sign off on those. The board needs to create their own job descriptions, and you need to have either bylaws or an agreement for how the board will or steering committee will engage. Consider who's missing at the table. So all of you should have 9B finished. Let's go to the next one. This goes to actual, this question number 10 goes to actual additional tools that you should have for the board and the board should have. And for those of you who are serving as the CEO or the executive director of your network, these tools are not tactical. You can actually, when you facilitate and support board discussions, the board agreement and board job descriptions can actually be part of strategic work. They can be really galvanizing, creative tools to discuss and to land on. So as you think about that, particularly, I'm thinking, Robert, you've got some health educators in the mix around your table. What a great, there's some really great perspectives here around creating job descriptions. So please answer number 10. Has the board agreement or job description been created and published? And again, as a side note, that job description and or job description or board agreement needs to be reviewed and signed on every year. If you are bringing on new board members, again, we often are so busy, we forget about this critical board responsibility. Board members need to provide orientation to their new members. What is the mission? What is the vision of this network? What are they adding to it? So that's question number 10. Question number 11, have they all been contacted about the opportunity to serve and have a copy of the board agreement? Again, many of you are at different junctures with the creation of your board. So the real key takeaway here on questions 10 and 11, do you have a document in place? Are you using it? Has everyone seen it? Do they understand it? And have they signed off on it? And hopefully the sign-off comes after a really lovely discussion, a reminder about this duty to serve the fiduciary responsibility that comes with being a board member in creating this very unique business model. So let's move in, if we could, to what else. How does a board track its progress? You've talked about, and what I don't know and can't see is how many people you have around your board table, but here are elements in a job description. So let's just consider if you do have 5 to 7 members around the table, and you may have many more, what are the possible elements of a job description? Number of meetings, how long the meetings are, that they'll attend these. The third bullet is particularly important. This is a distinction that a number of people moving onto boards will ask the board chair or will ask you as the facilitator, is this a working board or is this a fundraising board? Often in a fundraising board, in the job description, there's a literal requirement for either how much they'll contribute to the network or how much they will purchase. So there are some real financial targets in some networks tied to participation. In others, it's a working board, meaning that they're moving along the intent, purpose, mission, and vision of the board. So as you look at these job description elements and the qualities that you felt were important, please use the chat box and as what might be missing as you think about a job description. And by the way, there are so many board job descriptions online, easy to Google. Your TAs have job descriptions, but here are some key elements of a job description, and we'll tie those in a minute to reporting. What's missing? Or what would you take off? Anything? This is perfect? This is all you'd have? And by the way, a job description can easily be just this succinct. Beth, thank you. I see something coming through. Statement of conflict of interest. Perfect. If one of the attributes you're looking for in your board is consensus and inclusion, there will be times when conflicts of interest must be declared and a member recused from a vote or a decision. So knowing those conflicts of interest up front is just good house. It's as good as flossing your teeth. It's critical. Thank you for getting that up there. Perfect. Anything else? Attendance. Mark, that's really important, and we'll actually, when I show you a board report, if you're going to require attendance at quarterly workshops, consider having the board grapple with what percentage of attendance is critical before you're asked to please leave the board or to shore up your participation. When you put these qualities and kind of demands in place, because you know that structure drives behavior and sustainability for your network, you're going to need to have the board report on these. So I'm impressed with Deborah's not just attend but to provide. So in a moment when we get to the value proposition, Deborah, this will be a great reminder for all of us that one of the values that your board and your network members receive is training, and one of the benefits they can give and the values they can give is training. So that's a really wonderful kind of give and take. Perfect. Anything else on the job description? I don't want to belabor it, and one of the takeaways that you need from this discussion today is that you should engage your board in creating their job description. One of the key elements that you'll also hear as we move through this is the whole concept of alignment. Your job description, whether you have one or you just need to calibrate it, your job description, the job description of each board member, and the bylaws or agreement all need to be aligned, and that alignment is something that you check in on with your strategic planning session at least once a year. Alignment's really critical, and as we talked in change, everything is changing so quickly that, you know, doing the alignment checkup is really an important feature of both the board chair in guiding the board meetings and the network leader in facilitating those discussions. I want to really point here to a comment that Beth has made as participating in network evaluations. Beth, I'm going to read into your prompt here because it's an essential one, and if I'm reading too much into it, please forgive me, but network evaluations are usually threefold. It's the network evaluation on how the network is doing according to what you submitted to any of your grants, for any of your grants, whether it's to HRSA or whether it was United Way funding. You're evaluating the overall network performance based on metrics that you established in your proposal. You're also evaluating board participation and traction. Remember in the beginning we talked about the role of a board member is a fiduciary responsibility that drives very sound actions towards sustainability of that network. So you're also evaluating the board and the board members. And the third area of evaluation really falls on evaluating your network leader. Probably one of the greatest opportunities for change and enhancement is that often network leaders are not evaluated on a regular basis. And there's some evidence out there that quarterly feedback is even more vital and important than feedback given 12 months after the fact. But in any case, evaluation of the network's performance, the board performance, and the network leader's performance are all key. So that should be in all of the both the job description of your board and the job description of your network leader. Great. These are some wonderful additions to the job description. Again, capture the job description elements here, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but this begins to build a great framework. Board engagement bylaws, again, you want to talk about what's most important in having a board that really really moves you toward the sustainability that was envisioned when you started. It doesn't mean that the how won't change. In fact, it should. As you learn more and as you engage more diverse perspectives around your board and you involve, most importantly, your constituents in some way, shape, or form, the bylaws become an important way of forming how you move forward. And so question 12, there are bylaws completely done, barely done, roughly done. Just go ahead and check off 12. And to tell you the truth, if you land on they're roughly done, that is absolutely perfect and probably a great place for you to land around strategic planning. It takes you down and allows your board to do what's unclear based upon our mission, vision, and values. And if they don't yet have for your network mission, vision, and values, those are important items to clarify as you create the bylaws. So just take a second there and note what remains unclear. Just really interested, let's pause here a moment and kind of catch up with each of you. If you don't mind, those of you who do have bylaws or have rough bylaws, based on our conversation today, what one or two things are you going to kind of ask your board to take a look at refocusing on? What might be missing? With all of the demands in front of us, it's sometimes interesting to prioritize. So what is missing? Where do we need to ask the board to spend time? Any thoughts on that? We'll continue forward, and we'll have a chance to capture those at the end. So you want to, in question 12, just kind of do your own assessment about where you are and then what's clear. Mark is really pointing out one of the takeaways that emerges most commonly when we look at board roles and responsibilities, the need to expand. And that's not unusual. As you become more clear on the vision and purpose of your network, the expansion of the roles and responsibilities of your network board members will continue to need to be examined. So spot on, Mark. That's a perfect place to be. Here's another tool. In addition to the job description for you, job description for your board members, strategic planning once a year, more often if you want to do it, you need to have reports that go on a regular basis. Don't forget, many of your board members come into your board meetings, whether they're monthly or quarterly, face-to-face or virtual. They come in with their home job heavy on their shoulders, heavy on their minds. And so what you want to do and what your board wants to do is to really be able to transition as quickly as possible to what's present as a member of your board, as a leader of your board along with you. This is a sample that members of NCHN have used in tracking their board, and some of our NCHN members have long-standing networks. And so you can see here that a board report is a little complex, and yet it's pretty simple. Let's start in the middle here. What's very, very critical, and we'll talk at our last gathering on communication, the mission, vision, and values should be on every document you send out, including this document here on a board report. Certainly, every month or every quarter, whatever your board bylaws and the job description of your board members declare, you're going to want to have a financial update. Where are you in terms of your overall financial traction towards sustainability? This whole constituent, and you can rename this, and the naming, by the way, is essential. Is it a customer that you're serving, a constituent, a community member? Be very clear about you're doing this work on behalf of someone or some entity in your community or state. Who is that? How do they think you're doing? What are your goals and what's your traction? Again, doesn't have to be lengthy or intense, but you want to get to the core, the nugget of why the network exists. Then I'm going to switch over here and talk about business process. The board may have declared, for example, that you're going to start one business line. What is that business line? What are the milestones, and how are you doing on those? And the last one is, just like this is a learning community that your TAs felt was so important to put together, your board, most boards remain healthy and vibrant if you build in learning opportunities and growth for them. Again, things like bylaws and job descriptions can actually be so compelling as a way to learn from one another. So I would just pause here and say, this is a typical board report. What are we missing here that many of you might already be engaged in doing regular board reports? What might be missing here? Any thoughts, best practices out there? One of the boards that we've heard from actually tracks the attendance at meetings. It's written into the job descriptions. It's written into the bylaws. And so because it is, it's actually tracked and reported at each board member, at each board meeting. It doesn't kind of get at the value or essence that each board member might provide, but it is a metric to track. So are we missing anything here? Just kind of keep that in mind as a tool. Again, whatever is simple but pointed that allows the board to track its own progress is important to do on a regular basis. I see George adding something to this board process. We'll continue to the next section on value and toggle back. A critical part, as George is reminding us, is the HRSA grant deliverables. I'm going to flash back here, George, because this is an important part. That might fit in one of two places. Often the HRSA requirements, or any grant, by the way, that you have, fits here under what are the actions that you committed to for your business process. So what metrics did you say to HRSA? What outcomes did you declare to HRSA? And how are you doing on those? What are your measures for success, and what's your traction? The other place that could show up is on, of course, your financials. And usually those two, all of these interact, but usually these two play together. If you're a little light and you're not meeting your goals on either of these two areas, often then you come down here to this learning and growth. And this is where an interim strategic plan might be very worthwhile. Maybe just on one area of your HRSA grant objectives that you aren't quite meeting, or you may decide you need to adjust slightly. But this tracking mechanism really should include all funding sources, and particularly in this situation, your HRSA accountabilities. Thank you. Let's go now to the value proposition. This is often forgotten, and it's really probably gets at the core of what it means to serve on a board. Why would you, because all of your board members and you have a day job, why would they come to this board meeting and contribute time and conversation, particularly if they're sitting next to a competitor perhaps? So if you would, just take a few minutes and list only 4 of your board members, the board member's name and the organization that they represent. And both of those kind of identifiers are important. We've talked about competition. We've talked about conflict. We've talked about the fact when we met on change that often the individual might change, the organization might stay the same. So capture both. In the next column, we're going to answer two qualities. For each entity and person, what value do they provide this network, your network, and what does the network provide them? And we're going to pause here a moment and ask if you would please, this is the value proposition of having a board or a steering committee. If you will put in here, what is the value that members bring to you? Please capture them in the chat box. This is kind of the real fun of doing bylaws and job descriptions. You really want the essence of this contribution. the value proposition is really the foundation for sustainability often. So what is the value? Awareness of service. Jen, that is perfect. That kind of that polarity of the awareness of what services are needed, the awareness of what's provided, and the wonderful opportunity for gap assessment, and then what can be created. Perfect. Great. That fits so nicely and probably relates to a number of board members here. Cultural differences. Nice. Let's capture that, and that is well worth diving into the next time, Jennifer, when we talk about communication. The fact is that if you think about all those wild and wacky chairs that represent your board members a few slides back, the cultural awareness of who's around the table, who is in the community, those are really important. Michelle, thank you, the shared expertise. And I'm assuming, I want to read a little bit into this and tell me if I'm wrong. It's the expertise that's around the table and shared, and the expertise that a particular board member brings. Great. Anything else? What's the value proposition? You get up every morning and you're doing this phenomenal work, bringing together competitors who collaborate. That's so wild, isn't it, if you think about it? Don't think about it too long. Just know that you're doing amazing work. What is the value that people will spend their time on, and what do they give? This access to state policymakers is really a critical one, and Deborah, thank you. It ties actually to a trend for 2015 that that some of the thinkers have brought forward on what networks contribute. This is a really important one that we haven't probably spent as much time on as we could. So that's a real value. So you can see that in all of these comments, one of the values that's emerging is the value of sharing data, sharing information, sharing perspectives. You're convening at this table in the middle column. You're convening a value proposition conversation as the network leader. That is some of the very profound and tangible work you do. So your board members are fully engaged in this, and as often a network leader is the facilitator of what is the value proposition and the benefit not only to the members but also to the communities and the constituents served. Great. And then in the third column, and please continue to share in the chat box, but this third section here, what role does each one of these individuals or entities play? Are they the chairperson? Are they the tiebreaker? Sometimes that's an informal role, but a critical one. Are they the consensus builder? You can see there's a little bit of play here between value and roles. These could be formal roles or informal roles. But think about, is someone the innovator? Someone the entrepreneur? Someone and I apologize, I can't remember who brought this up, but who is the member that's able to say, here's barriers we should be aware of? That person is invaluable. I don't know about all of you, but I'd rather know about a sandbog before I walk right into the middle of it. So those are really critical. And then the other opportunity here is who is really contributing directly to thoughts of sustainability and future funding. Those are roles that you want around your table. Beth just pointed this out in the chat box as well. So this is item 13 on your assessment. It's actually the last item, but we think it's actually probably the most important. It ties so closely to who's not at your table. So as you look at this value proposition and you go back to question 9 about who's really at your table, who's around your board table, and who might be missing, take a look at question 9B again and see if there's anyone else that you'd like to tuck in as a possibility for your board to consider who might not be there based on this value proposition. Go ahead and do that. Okay. As we move forward, I'm going to open this up again to, this ties back to the area we did on change. I want to open it back up again to say what trends are you seeing in 2015. Please know that as you start your network, even if, and this group is so wonderful because some of you have job descriptions, some of you have bylaws, some of you don't. It really shows this, the beginning of a new network, maybe ending the startup and moving into what's called a neutral zone of kind of changing gears and solidifying things, and a new beginning to moving forward to really having infrastructure in place. So keep in mind that change is always going on both in your network, in your members of your network, and with you yourself as a leader. Let's pause here and say, if you think about change, what trends do you think you will face in network in 2015? Just kind of throw them in the chat box. We want to kind of give you that as the last piece of information in building these pieces of infrastructure. And I'm going to pull Bess out here to say additional funding is perhaps one of the first ones, that everyone is going to be looking for resources, and let's just call it resources instead of funding, because that encompasses probably both a monetary and shared service concepts. So what do you think are opportunities or challenges facing networks? What trends are you seeing? Does that make sense? The first one here might be this whole resource crunch that we're facing in many parts of the country. I'm sure Washington is not the only place facing this. What trends are you seeing? Because often as the network leader, you and the board are really looking at the horizon. You're really kind of projecting out there, what do you need to take into place? George Great, the ACA insurance, the ACA insurance trends. That's a whole body of watching trends in and of itself. Other trends that you have out there, when you think about your network, the board accountability as fiduciary agents to build infrastructure and traction towards sustainability, what other trends are you seeing out there? Sometimes doesn't it seem like just getting through the day is enough of a trend, and accomplishing everything on your to-do list? Let's talk about then a couple of things that have to do, and please keep thinking about this. This will inform your bylaws and your discussions. There are probably 4 or 5 trends that you might want to keep in mind as you build the job descriptions, as you build the bylaws, and you think about your yearly or regular strategic planning. You want to think about this whole area of succession planning. One of the reasons this particular slide, as I put this together to kind of give you some room to contemplate what the kind of strategic area you're dealing with, is that often the board or the individuals who came together to start your network may not be the ones that decide to carry it onward. They may be your innovators, and then they move on. So succession planning becomes a trend that many boards are looking at, and I'd put that in your mix. What would the terms of your board members look like? So you perhaps stagger terms so that you've got a succession planning model in place. I want to pick up the next one that Deborah's talked about, a trend that she's seeing as an opportunity for a focus on wellness and prevention. You want to keep in mind what your community and your constituents are asking for. Keep that ear to the ground. The other thing that's emerging from many nonprofit boards around the country is this whole area of the sharing economy. It's the collaboration. It could be sharing space. It could be sharing HR experts, IT experts. It's this whole concept of what does it mean to share. Mark has put in here this trend of resource and resource squeeze. I think that that's a really important consideration. It certainly goes at your mandate to look at sustainability. And another trend that you might be seeing, and another way to frame resources, is the trend that a number of boards are seeing about they now have more retirees on the board. That doesn't mean that every retiree has tons of time, but they may have expertise and time not tied to a day job that they could contribute. That's a resource. And so as you think about resources for funding, also think about resources as who you recruit on the board and what kind of time they have. And then the last item to look at is board members don't just sit at the table, they actually engage if given an opportunity to. I don't know any board member, or gosh, in my experience, most board members I've ever worked with really donate the time and agree to participate, not just because they're interested in the networking. They really want to contribute in an area that is innovative, that's bringing together a really diverse group of people. So as boards become more defined on what they do and how they do work, whether it's looking at what's a population health model, and Denise, that's just a whole wonderful, vibrant opportunity for boards to look at creating with communities, along with wellness and how those two toggle together. Those are trends that you want to keep in mind as you look at who's serving on your board, what's their term for serving, what's their job description that they really understand, agree to, and live into, what's your job description, and then how will you each evaluate how you're doing in this. That really kind of takes us both through your assessment and just a last reminder that as we talked, the change that you're going to experience in your network is just really endless. How you're changing and what's important to you as you go to more talks like this. Your board members are changing, their organizations are changing, and so constantly looking at or regularly looking at these pillars of infrastructure really become important to driving sustainability that I know is heavy on each of your minds. And I would leave you with one last thing as you go through the attributes that are so important. We talked about responsibility. We talked about being present. We talked about declaring conflicts of interest, that whole area of transparency. It's the character that you're looking for, both from yourself, from your board members, from the services that you create and provide. And it sounds like for many of you who've moved in this direction, those things are in place. I want to just pause here and say, as you think about these tools, what's missing for you? Or what have we not thought about that really makes boards effective? Some of you have been at this work for a long time and have some wonderful practices behind you. What are we missing when we talk about board development? Anything? Okay, great. As you finish off this assessment, here are two things to look at between now and the next time we're together. Take a look, please, at question 9 with your board. This is a great question to use in one of your board meetings. This question of, and this assessment tool is very legitimate to share and have your board fill out. If they fill it out independently, by the way, and then talk about it at the board meeting, I probably don't need to tell you this. You'll get wonderful, diverse opinions when you do this. So sharing particularly question number 9 with your board, and then the question around bylaws or agreements, question 12. Those two questions are pivotal as you begin to build traction and bench strength in either a current board or a board that's emerging. Also, the question 13 will tie directly to our communication conversation the next time, and it's on the value the essence that each one of these board members brings to your network. So with that in mind, let me turn it back to Leslie and have her close it out. Thank you so much for your thoughtfulness today, for the trends, and for identifying what's possible, and have a great month.
Thanks, Mary Kay. And I just pulled up some assessment questions from today's webinar. So if you guys could take just a couple minutes to answer those questions. The overall satisfaction is the only one that will broadcast on the screen. We switched up the questions a little bit to get some more information from you guys about the impact of today's webinar. So if you could provide one piece of information about board development that you learned today, a strategy from today's call that you're going to try out over the next month, who you'll reach out to for